Our mateys, Chapter 9, Lesson 2. Top of the morning to you, lads and lasses, as we set sail on the USS Charles Dietrich. Arr. Indeed, in this chapter we be talking about the Great Depression. Arr. And in particular, we'll be looking at two essential question answers today as we try to figure out how depressions affect society. We'll be talking about hopelessness and how hopelessness impacts a people and how coming out of that hopelessness you need to connect with others, feeling like you can escape from your dreary dead world. And the world is truly a dreary and deadly thing in 1930 as the Depression worsens underneath President Hoover. So what we're looking at here as hopelessness sets in is that really America is reeling from one crisis to another, to another, to another. Remember that in the fall of 1929, we had the stock market collapse, right? That stock market crash of October in 1929. And within a year, you're going to see over 1,000 banks close. Within 2 years, 30,000 buildings close. Within 3 years, 25% of Americans are without a job. So America, over the next several years, the last couple of years of Hoover's presidency, are going to be, we're going to be falling from one pitfall into another, into another, into another. And this first part of the lesson is going to talk about why so many people might have felt helpless during the Great Depression and how that hopelessness impacts their lives. For example, when you are jobless for years on end, in America in the 1930s, there's no welfare. There's no anything like that, right? We think about the things we have now to help people. If you're jobless and poor, or even if you're just poor, not even jobless, you have Medicaid for health insurance. There is welfare, a monthly income to help you try and get by. There is housing assistance so that you can hopefully find some cheaper or more affordable housing. There is free or reduced lunch if you need to take advantage of that. There is unemployment insurance, which is a weekly check that you can get if you are unemployed or if you've lost your job. And there are many, many, many other programs like this to help people survive in the modern world if they lose their job. But in the 1920s, and the 1930s, those things don't exist. So when you end up jobless, there's no one to go to. There's no one to ask for help in the federal government or even the state government. You know, when you have three options, for example, for food when you're jobless, right? You can stand in a bread line, which is what all these people over here on the left are doing, standing in a bread line for free food. You can line up outside a soup kitchen that a private group might set up, like a church or something like that. Or you go hungry. I mean, those are your options for most Americans, not most, but at least 25% of Americans at the time. And understand here that the Americans that we're talking about, the people that we're talking about here, they're in crisis, right? First, it's the job, right? They lose the job. When you lose your job, obviously issues like food or health care become problems. But if you lose that job long term, all of a sudden, those problems expand. And so now it's not just food and health that you're dealing with, but it's also issues like housing. What if I lose my house? Then what? Where am I going to go? What am I going to do? And that's the reality that so many of these people face. It's one expanding crisis after another. If it's not housing, it might be food or health care. If it's not food or health care, it's simply the job and keeping the job. And what that means is that over time, if you lose that job, people aren't going to be able to pay their rent or their mortgage. And you can understand why some people, if that's the case, you can't pay your rent or mortgage, they might not want to leave. Well, you're going to be evicted if that's the case, right? They're going to force you out if you can't pay your mortgage or pay your rent. And those bailiffs, those court officers, are going to be the people that do that. A bailiff, by the way, is the guy that's always in a courtroom who has the police uniform on. That's a bailiff. Like if you watch Judge Judy, it's the dude that stands right next to Judge Judy. That's a bailiff. What you end up with then is a large portion of our population, 25%, that are in truly desperate circumstances. Right? Here's a quote from a newspaper at the time. They have one-room shacks about 10 to 12 feet big, no rugs, no water, no bed. There's a little ironwood stove, water carried from a faucet at the end of the street. I mean, we're talking about living in conditions worse than tenement houses at this point, folks. And shanty towns, actually, like shack towns, are going to start to be built up all across America, especially on the edges of cities. And they actually become known as Hoovervilles because people blame the president for their poverty. And take a look at some of these images there that I've called up on Google Images of Hoovervilles. It's a great example. I like this image that you can see right here, especially because if you look at it, right, you can see in the background, right, you can see cityscapes in the background here. And then look at all of these shanty towns. And they really hit that description pretty well, right? What are those shacks that you see here, right? Maybe 10 or 11 by 12 feet, right? One room, dirt floor, you can see it. These are those terrible living conditions for large portions of Americans. And there's no assistance for them. There's no government aid. America, at this point, is looking like an extraordinarily impoverished country. And it is. It is an extraordinarily impoverished country when it comes to these things like Hoovervilles. So it's no surprise then, or it shouldn't be a surprise to you, that there are going to be people who don't want to stay in this situation. They're going to want to get out. They're going to want to leave. And a lot of those people are going to do so by slipping into open boxcars on rail lines and freight trains. And we actually give them a nickname. We call them hobos because they hop home on boxcars. Hobo. And they're going to try and find a new life for themselves somewhere. And I don't want you to think that this is just white America as well. This kind of hopelessness will set in on ethnic minorities as well. A good example of this is going to be Latinos and Latino immigrants. Not just immigrants, by the way, but Latinos in general, especially in the Southwest. You're going to have whole groups of people, posses, in essence, right? Self-deputized people who say, I'm going to take this on myself to get rid of what we think are illegal Latino immigrants. And they're going to round these people up and forcibly return them to Mexico. They don't have permission to do this. They just go and do it. And in many cases, they're actually returning American citizens. They're just sending American citizens to Mexico because they're Latinos, right? Because they are making the assumption that quote unquote their jobs are being taken, right? And so here people are desperate enough to take those jobs that they wouldn't normally take, and they're going to try and push people out of America in order to take those jobs. Another group you're going to see really hopeless during the 1920s and really see their lives also kind of spiral from one crisis to another are going to be farmers. And I feel so bad in the way that we have to treat poor farmers in this class, but they suffered terribly in the 1930s because not only are they suffering from the Depression, right? We know that all of America is suffering from the Great Depression. On top of that, farmers across America are going to be suffering from 10 years of drought, a decade with little to no rain. And what happens when you have prolonged experiences with drought And when you farm the way people farmed in the 1920s and 30s, you're going to end up with unbelievable dust storms that will ravage whole huge areas of America. To help you understand the severity and the incredible damaging nature of these dust storms, I pulled up a couple images here, and you can really see the enormity of these storms. And I got to tell you, if I saw one of these things rolling towards me over flat, open expanses of land, I would be freaking out. I mean, look at this wall of dirt and dust and flying wind just kind of crashing over this town right here. How tiny everything looks in comparison to it. It looks like these places are just going to be wiped off the map, like this. It's almost like a volcanic explosion of dust just rolling across. And these storms could last for hours. In some cases, they could last for days. So these farmers will experience these catastrophic dust storms and this terrible drought, which is going to go on and on and on for decades. And you're looking at, with those dust storms, 50 storms a year. On average, people are going to experience. So you're going to have a whole huge swath of America called the Dust Bowl, located in the Great Plains. And I called up a map here to help you see what I'm looking at when I talk about the Dust Bowl. And this map over here, and really any of these will do, but you can see the Dust Bowl here, the region impacted by all of these dust storms and this incredible, tremendous drought. The darker the color, the worse the dust storms are, so you can see how particularly bad it was right here in the Great Plains. But the whole region in general was impacted by these incredible, tremendous dust storms for a decade. So that whole region itself becomes known as the Dust Bowl. And when you have farmers already under pressure, right, from the debt that they've had to take out because in the 1920s farm wages were so low, when you have farmers already under pressure from that debt, when you have prices falling because of the Great Depression and people unable to buy your crops, then when you add into this the Dust Bowl, the drought, these farmers are going to be completely impoverished, and they're going to lose their livelihood, they're going to lose their land, because everything that they know is going to be swallowed up by this environmental disaster. There's a great little quote right here. Dust-covered, you're going to see dust-covered buildings and crops and livestock. Everything just becomes filthy to the extent that people can suffocate if you're caught outside in one of these storms. So their livelihoods are destroyed, the storms are there, and everything gets caked in dust. Dust to eat, dust to breathe, dust to drink in your beds and your flower bins. Everything about their lives becomes brown and dirty and essentially difficult. So many of these farmers are in such tough times that you're going to see them have to turn their farms over to banks that hold the mortgages on their lands, and a whole slew of them are going to become migrants as a result, because they can't stay in the Dust Bowl and farm. It's going to be impossible. So many of them penniless, right? They're bankrupt. They've lost their farm. Their mortgage is gone. They're going to leave that Dust Bowl. They're going to head west, and they're going to be searching for a better life. Many of them will go to California, but they're not going to find a better life. And we'll talk about that more in class. And with that, I think you can understand why, in the face of all of this hopelessness, whether you're a farmer or a Latino immigrant, or whether you are just a person who's lost their job and been unemployed for years and struggling, that people feel like they have to have a connection with some others. They have to escape, right? You have to have something in your life that can help you get away from what's really been hurting you, what's really been making your life particularly difficult. And Americans in the Great Depression are no exception from that. They're going to need that escape, probably more than ever. So you're going to see people who have the means, or even a few spare cents, try to find something to take their mind off their hopelessness. For example, radio programs become incredibly popular. Movies become incredibly popular. Why? Because they take you away. They take you to another place, a foreign land, They take you into your imagination. So you'll see things like the Marx Brothers in their comedy, or The Wizard of Oz, right, or Gone with the Wind, these movies that have become American classics because they've helped a people survive in terribly tough times. Even soap operas, daily dramas about the struggle of the middle class, that resonates with Americans. And, you know, of course, let's be honest, we can produce soap operas or movies or whatever else, but there's always money behind it, right? So even these soap operas were sponsored by laundry companies because they were designed to connect with American women at the time, to try and give women a voice in the Great Depression who were feeling hopelessness. You're going to see people look for ways to express the anguish that others feel, to inspire them. So photojournalism, people that go out to take pictures like Dorothea Lange or Margaret Burke White, they will go out and try and show how the average American is dealing with and surviving the Great Depression. Painters like Grant Wood are going to show traditional American values to try and inspire people to never give up. His painting American Gothic, for example, pays tribute to this Midwestern idea of people that will never, ever give up. I'll show you what I mean by that. I'll insert a copy of his picture here. And you can see that painting right here, and you can tell that these people are determined, right? They're not going to give up. They are almost stoic. And stoic, by the way, means that they repress their emotions, right? They are very controlled because they're not going to give up. They might feel hopelessness, but they're not going to survive. And that's the kind of thing that Grant Wood was trying to show and pay tribute to for those folks that were living in the Dust Bowl. So there you have it. Hopelessness and connection as a way to fight that in the Great Depression, and we'll talk more about this in class.